Luke 14, verse 1 says this. It happened then when Jesus went into the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees on the Sabbath day to eat bread. They were watching him closely. That is, the religious leaders, the Jews, they were watching everything he did. They were, basically trying to spy out anything that could be an accusation against him. And so he goes over. He's part of this occasion to eat bread together in a Pharisee's house, and he, obviously, as the Son of God, was aware of what they were thinking. So, again, tense situation, but there he is. Now, jump down to verse 7. And he began speaking a parable to the invited guests when he noticed how they had been picking out the places of honor at the table, saying to them, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, 'Give your place to this man,' and then in disgrace you will proceed to occupy the last place. But when you are invited, go and recline at the last place, so that when the one who has invited you comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' Then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." Now, if you've read the Gospels and just the life of Christ, you realize that Jesus said this more than once. That last phrase there, "For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." And obviously, there's a principle there that I think is important, that the Lord wants us to be able to understand it and grasp it. And in this case, he gave this illustration. He was actually at someone's house. They were there. He was noticing certain things about what they were doing, and they were choosing certain seats that were, in a sense, the preferred seats. And it became that occasion for him to actually explain this principle again and to talk about it with those who were there, and to make it a lesson for them to understand some pitfalls that can actually become a part of our lives. And even though this was obviously there in this religious leader's household, obviously, even in our situation, in our living with others and participating in different ways, in groups and that type of thing, and just in life in general, there are things that the Lord would want to actually then take this lesson and apply it to our own situations in terms of what it means, what God's plans and purposes are for our lives, and ultimately, I think something that I think he wants us to realize is every single situation that we're in, everything that is part of our, in a sense, world of our life, and the folks that we interchange with and we have involvement with, the Lord wants to speak into those situations, and he wants to actually have his hand in our lives so that it has a great application no matter what we're doing or who we're with, no matter what it is that would be, in a sense, the most uncommon place where he would ever work. Those places actually matter to the Lord, and not just what we do, but why we do what we do is critical with Jesus. If we were to look at these other verses, we'll take a look real quick. You see that he knew what was in their hearts. So look at verse 2. "And there in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy, and Jesus answered and spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, 'Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?' But they kept silent. And he took hold of him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, 'Which one of you will have a son or an ox fall into a well and will not immediately pull him out on a Sabbath day?' And they could make no reply to this." So he knew what they were thinking. He understood what was on their hearts, and he, rather than walking away from it, he actually walks right on into it, and he addresses the issues. And the same thing here now, as he's watching different individuals sit in different places and actually order in a sense, order the honor in their lives of what they hope to actually have in terms of people paying attention to them and giving them some sort of kind of prestige by virtue of where they sit. Jesus looks at our hearts. It's hard sometimes to recognize that, it isn't just pure action, doing this or doing that, but God wants the motive to be right of why we do what we're doing. And so all the time, whether we realize it or not, he is watching us. Whether we realize it or not, he understands the ins and outs of our hearts and really even, the filthiness of our hearts sometimes, of wanting to have attention, to have other people's approval, to have other people pat us on the back and to say, that was really special what you did. And he's warning them that there's a principle that will actually come into play if that is in fact what your heart does. Because God has ordained that he is in control of every aspect of our lives, and if he says so, then he can actually address pride in our hearts directly. And you might think your action's somehow going to put you in a higher spot or do something that will actually make you have more attention from others. But I'm sure you've experienced this. The very thing that I thought was going to actually, in a sense, make me be up there or have that place that I've always wanted, turns around and it actually causes me to come face to face with the fact, you know what? You wanted to be that, you wanted to do that, but you know what? What you were trying to attain was false. And God addressed your pride, and he turned it on you and showed you that what you really needed was humility. What you really needed was a lowering in your perspective. And God does that. So let's look at it. Verse 7. And Jesus began speaking a parable to the invited guests when he noticed how they had been picking out the places of honor at the table. So they were obviously probably the closer to the bride and groom, or the closer to the parents or whoever, the closer to the nicer tables, they would actually go gravitate towards those spots so that they would be noticed and so that they would get that kind of recognition that, oh boy, they must have been special friends of the bride and groom or the party of the family. They must have been special. And he's watching this and he's saying, wow, look at the hearts that are involved here. Look at what's really going on. People could actually think that they're moving into those close positions to be able to better demonstrate love or to actually show more respect for the wedding party or whatever. But what's really happening is they're looking for that opportunity to be noticed and to have a focus not on what was going on in the wedding, but a focus on them. And you know what? Even in the church sometimes, if the Lord was to be able to actually, in a sense, put it up on the screen, what we are actually thinking, put it up on the screen where our hearts are really at, and what it means when we do what we do, boy, sometimes I think we would be so humiliated because it isn't as loving as it looks. It isn't as wonderful as it comes across, because underneath it is this pride that says, hey, take a look at me. Look what I did. Look at how, spiritual I am. Look at what I actually accomplished by doing this, or how many people are actually following me. Those kinds of things. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it's pride, it's arrogance, and God hates pride. He hates pride because the self-focus is counter to truly what is the fact and truth of what all the reality about. We are not the center. God is at the center. And the Lord wants us to bring glory to him and not glory to ourselves. And so, does God do you a favor when he addresses your pride? He sure does. Even though I'll tell you what, it is something that, will jerk you Like, oh. Because, speaking from experience, when I've had pride in my heart and things like that, and I'm of that kind of perspective, and it's the last thing I want to have anything come out that would actually identify that, because that in itself is in a sense, a slap in my face to say, you didn't get away with it. You tried to elevate yourself. You tried to somehow portray yourself in a certain way, but God would have no part of it. And now you're going to actually have to witness with everyone else how foolish that was, and really the real truth about who you are. That you aren't, in this sense, anything special, because everything you have comes from God. And it's a healthy thing. It's a healthy thing to have your pride dealt with. Sometimes I have guys come in and I disciple them, and we'll talk about different things we can go through. And one of the things that is a common thing for me to have them go through is this book I have. It's just like 1 or 2 page readings from different authors throughout time on humility. So it's like 1 page right after the other. You just read one and then the next. And these are some of the greatest examples of God bringing humility into different people's lives. And I can tell you it's not the most popular book to read, because when you read it, it's like you're really eating crow the whole time kind of a thing, because you realize, oh, that's right. I never thought of that. I never thought that my motive would be that filthy and that against God, but now I can see it. But as you go through it, it's one of the most healthy things you can do, because it's not true humility is not being humiliated, all right? Somehow, having it rubbed in your face. True humility means being brought to the lowly place, that you see yourself really, truly in the way that God does, and you don't exalt yourself. You recognize that your need is for Him to have His hand on your life all the time, and that every good thing comes from Him, and He deserves all the glory. Pride steals glory from God. Pride steals glory from God, from the right place it's supposed to go. And I'm appreciative of the Lord in my own life when He's addressed it, because even though it hurt, even though it was like a knife, it was healthy to me, because I needed to humble myself before the Lord. And I believe that of all the things in Scriptures that you could put a high value on, it's when God actually humbles you. There's a high value to that. You will never see things straight and the way they really are unless God humbles you. You have a skewed view otherwise, because you're kind of at the center. You're not at the center. God is. And actually, when He humbles you for the first time, you can actually see things from His perspective and have an understanding that will get you through, because it's not reliant upon yourself to get you through. It's God who's going to do it. I'll say it another way. Pride will cause it'll cause you to stumble. It'll cause you to mess up. It'll get worse. It won't get better, because you will make wrong assumptions. You'll judge things in a wrong way. And you'll realize after a while, you know what? Your own feet are causing yourself to trip. Your devices are the things that are standing in your own way. And it's the most loving thing to do that God does in our hearts and our lives, when He says, listen, buddy, listen, gal, listen, daughter, listen, son, I am not going to let you get away with that anymore. We're addressing this. Because for you to grow and for you to become who I want you to be, we've got to get this out of the way. And then, by His glory, for His glory, we can say, thank you, Lord. Praise you, God, that you dealt with this crazy poison that's in my life that needed to be addressed and removed. So He notices this, and He recognizes they're picking these places out for honor. Verse 8. When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by him. Now, this is a real deal going on right here. He actually was there in this group, and he's talking to them about what they just were doing. He noticed it, and he's actually there saying, you know what? Don't do this. Don't actually judge from this standard, but you know what? Instead, don't take the place of honor, because listen, there might be someone that's more distinguished than you are. Don't actually, in a sense, presume and take this step, because you know what? It could come right back on you. And so be alert, because choosing the lower place is the right thing when it comes to doing what God wants you to do. Choosing the lower place, the last place, is really consistent with what God would have you to do. Because then you're choosing not to exalt yourself, not to put yourself higher than you are, but let God decide. That's what he's saying. Let God decide. It's much better for him to step into the situation and into your life, and for him to move things that he would actually, because of the original choice to not exalt yourself, he will lift you up. He'll place you where he will be. When it's the opposite of that, it's damaging. Verse 9, and he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this man, and then in disgrace you proceed to occupy the last place. You know, it reminds us what Jesus said, the first will be last and the last will be first. You know, it's just an amazing thing of the teachings of the Lord is addressing, you know, oftentimes those that we think are the ones who are going to be the exalted ones, the ones who are going to get it all or are going to have the greatest blessings, are actually the ones that the Lord actually humbles. The one that you wouldn't expect, the one who's not presumptuous or does not have, in a sense, this foregone conclusion of how they deserve these things or they have a right to these things, and they step back, God will step into their life and show them, listen, this is who you are. There's no battle or competition somehow inside of themselves, because God can actually go in and demonstrate his love in their life and what their value is and their place is, because they have not taken that first step on their own to step in his way. And the word in this translation, and then end up, when you step in God's way, you end up in disgrace. You end up in disgrace because now you've got to actually be seen going from where you wanted to be down to where you now are going to have to be, because your honor has been stripped from you and you're placed in a lower position. And it's very demeaning from the standpoint of what you originally were trying to do. You know, the disgrace wouldn't be so bad if you hadn't have stepped in and tried to elevate your ego and you let God have his way right from the beginning. But because you and I actually try to honor ourselves, we set ourselves up for the worst disgrace. I can think of times in my life, man, I blushed. I was so ashamed of what happened that came back on my head because I was trying to puff myself up. You know, it's got to be careful. You know, we really honestly are always in desperate need. We're always in a place where we need the Lord in our lives. We never have it together. We always are to be reliant upon him. And we're really honestly deceived. We're deceived when we think that we don't need him. Right? We have believed a lie within ourselves. And that's going to come back, and it's going to end up causing us to stumble in a variety of different ways. And the very thing we wanted to do Perhaps we'll never get to it because we tried to exalt ourselves in the middle of things, and because of that, God's hand was not able to do what he wanted to do, showing us the grace he wanted to bring to our lives. God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Verse 10, but when you are invited, go and recline at the last place, so that when the one who has invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at the table with you. Now, I just want to get practical with this. Read this again, verse 10. But when you are invited, go and recline at the last place. Right? Not the in-between place. You'd think the lesson would be, don't try to go so high, right up there by the wedding couple or whatever, but go in the middle somewhere and then you're safe. But no, Jesus says, as an example of humility, he says, go to the last place. Go to the, in a sense, least place of honor where no one would even notice you. You would get no recognition at all. And then watch and see what happens. Because in this situation, because you chose the last place, now it's the exact opposite. Rather than disgrace, you're going to see that the person who invited you comes and gets you and says, you shouldn't be sitting here. You're closer to this wedding party than that. You're a close individual to the bride and the groom. Come up. And then everybody watches you as you're actually going up to that honorable spot. Well, obviously, he's not just talking about wedding feasts. He's talking about our lives. My question is this. Does this really happen? Does this really happen? Does God really do this? Both in the negative way and in the positive way. Does he allow you to actually experience disgrace when you try to exalt yourself? Yes. Does he also, in the heart and life of an individual who chooses to not exalt himself, but to take the humble road and to lay their lives down and to say, Lord, I don't deserve anything. Lord, I don't deserve recognition, and it's not the right thing. Lord, I am not going to push the envelope here. I'm going to let you take care of my affairs. How many people I have known who tried to push themselves to what they think they're supposed to get to, and they keep running into a wall. Conversely, I've known others who they really have had the Lord work in their heart and their lives, and they get to this point, you know what? I don't have to be the one that's the first to be acknowledged. I don't have to be the one that somehow gets the most attention. I don't need to make a name for myself. I'm okay with it being the Lord and myself. And when that happens, wow, God will exalt you. You know why? Because he knows you won't get the wrong idea about it. He knows that your heart has been emptied of that conceit and pride, and he can then give you some of those things that are honorable and an exaltation, because you will not confuse it in your mind that it has anything to do with how he values you. Isn't it true that sometimes when something all comes together so much, we just have this tendency to begin to elevate ourselves and to think of ourselves as especially amazing? You know what I mean? Man, did you see that? They talked about me. Wow. Somebody said that nobody did it like I did it. And we're just like, oh, man, if we could get elevator shoes, we just go higher and higher and higher, like, or puffed up. And God says, you know what? Son, daughter, I'm gonna hold off with glorifying myself in your life like I want to, because we need to get something straight first. You need to realize that when I use you, it has nothing to do with my love for you, your value as a person. It simply has to do with me glorifying myself through your life. And I'm the one who is to receive all that glory. Do not steal my glory from me, because it does not belong to you. Every good gift comes from God. Every good thing does. Have you ever had a wrestling match with God? And this issue, you want things to get going. You want God to move in a mighty way. You want him to use your life. I got saved, and I was on the football team. And I was entering my senior year. And I've been in football for a long time now, and I thought, this is my senior year. I finally get to be one of the starters. But I got saved right before fall. So I go into it, and here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, well, Lord, you've changed my life, and I want to see other people come to the Lord. So, Lord, make me so good as a tight end that everybody will think that I am so amazing that they'll listen to me when I tell them about you. Now, I don't know if I said those exact words, but I'm telling you what was in my heart. It's like almost an equation. Make me good, and I will witness for you. You know, let me shine and catch that pass just like that. And then I'll be able to talk to all the guys about Jesus. Do you know what happened? I got to be the rottenest I ever had been as a tight end. It got to the place where the younger person, younger than me, they actually replaced me. Every ability that I had left. I'm thinking, Lord, somehow we're not communicating well. Something is wrong here. And you know what? It dawned on me. Wow. One of my mentors at that time, he watched me in the weight room, and he came to me afterwards and he said, you know what? I see a lot of pride in what you're doing. And I got so mad at him, but he was absolutely right. And God was addressing the pride of my life. And God wasn't going to let it go. And whose abilities were they really? If I could catch, where did I get that from? If I could run fast, where did I get that from? It was from God. And God was not going to share his glory with me. And I was a new believer. And I believe God's hand was upon my life to show me, you know what? You got to choose which way you're going. A lot of the reason that I wanted to be a football player was what? For popularity? It was to be somebody. Before I was a Christian, I had these, fantasies of, I'll be a pro football player, But God was saying, no, you know what? All of that hot air, it's going away now because you've signed on with me. And my heart for you is that you would grow in me, and I know that you will not grow in that circumstance. So I'm taking you out. I ended up quitting. And honestly, it's a weird thing, but it was part of me not looking back and following Jesus. It was part of me embracing his work and will for my life, and I'm thankful. And the Lord does that kind of thing for us, and he knows each one of us personally and individually how it shows up. What does it look like? And it can look like a lot of things. You know what? You can take unhealthy pride in some things that seem like the most natural and right thing for you to do. The mom, has the tribe underneath her of all her family, and she does a good job taking care of them all. Well, that's awesome. But you know what? She could become confused and actually not give God glory for her ability to take care of each one of them. She can actually take pride in her home and not quickly give God what he really deserves in relation to all of it, because it all came from him. host of different ways. Guys, at work, you can get a fat head about how you do things and the respect that you are due. And the Lord watches it all. And I think, we shouldn't be surprised because it's a bluff. He calls our bluff, and he shows us how helpless and really useless we can be if we aren't dependent upon him. It'd be a horrible thing for God to let that go for a long period of time. I mean, honestly, it's one of the greatest things he does for us that in terms of his disciplining of us to actually pull the rug out from under our feet and let us fall because of what our own understanding is of what we think we deserve and what our rights are and who we are, that kind of thing, so that we would then cry out to him and then begin to realize the truth. I've shared from different passages before that humility and faith go hand in hand. If you're a humble person, you're a lowly person. You haven't blown yourself up in your perspectives, and because of that, that opens the door for God to actually give you a new interpretation of who you are, but also put in your heart a trust in him for things he wants to do through your life. And not a confusion kind of thing. The glory goes to him because you're having faith in what he does rather than in what you do. So faith and humility go hand in hand. But listen, lack of faith and pride go hand in hand. If you're someone who struggles with believing, could it be there's too much self-sufficiency in your life? I've in my life had too much self-sufficiency, and God has addressed it. God, I don't know if I know I've told this story to individuals, but I don't know if I've told it to the congregation before. But if I did, I'll just share it again. I was reading Isaiah one time, and it talked about God's judgment on Moab. And it talked about the fact that Moab had unassailable walls, which means you can't climb them. They're too thick and too high. And God was saying to Moab, listen, you think you have unassailable walls, but they're not unassailable to me. I'm bringing them down. And I was reading this thing, Judgment about Moab, and I'm thinking, as sometimes I do, when are we going to get out of the passages on Moab and Egypt, and let's get to something that has more application to my life? And God speaks to me, and he says to me, you have unassailable walls, or what you think are unassailable walls, and it's your self-sufficiency. It's your self-reliance that you think that makes you safe, that nobody can get in, and I'm getting in. And I'm gonna put those down to dust. Now, God said that to me. And I'm thinking, what's this going to look like? Because that's not going to be comfortable. I know it's not, and it wasn't. It was hard. And God dealt with it, but I praise God for that. Man, you know what? Those things that we've constructed can be the greatest deterrent for God in what he wants to do in our lives. The grace that he wants to show us and the blessing that he wants to bring us. Truly, we are our worst enemies when we have pride, because we're stopping the grace of God coming in like it should come into our life, like a flood. That's what God wants, like a flood, to pour his Spirit into us that we would be who he's called us to be. Let me read 10 again. But when you are invited, go and recline at the last place, so that when the one who has invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at the table with you. I got to say one more thing about this. But when you are invited, go and recline at the last place. What does that look like internally? Internally, I think there would probably be an initial thought, right now I'm going to pursue something that will elevate me, that will get me to where I want to be, and an active, deliberate choice to say, no, I don't need to do that. In fact, I know I shouldn't do that. A deliberate decision to stay unexalted or pursuing something that would build our ego in any way, we say, no, thank you. Can I just say that if that's something that rings true in your life, that is a great sign of you maturing spiritually. Because if that goes on in your heart and you deny that impulse to be well known, to take the glory, to bring attention to yourself, to have the approval, if you are actually more and more content with that not being a part, man, that is a indication that the Lord is having his way in your life. And you say, man, if I don't do it, who will do it? It's a weird thinking we have sometimes. I'm so used to just, putting my face out there, I'm so used to making a name for myself. I'm so used to I'm the one who's, waving the banner about what's going to happen if I stop doing that? I'll tell you what's going to happen if you do it in the name of the Lord. You, for the first time, are going to be able to rest, and you're going to watch and see that God steps in on your side and does what we just sang. His love defends you. His love defends you. He's going to stand with you. You don't have to stand on your own anymore. He can actually be the advocate that he is supposed to be in your life. You got out of the way so that he could do it. And I'll just give you one last illustration. It has to do with football too. This is like I'm ashamed to say it, I guess, but maybe like 6 years ago, we were at Judy's, and we went over to the park to play football. And it's something about football, everybody wants to be the quarterback, all right? Or everybody wants to go out for a pass. Why? That's where you get the glory, right? So we've always played football there. We went to the park and stuff, and we went out there, and of course I remembered previous years and things about, trying to tame myself because I wanted to throw the ball. I wanted to be the quarterback. And remembering having that struggle. And this particular year, I got there, and for the first time, it wasn't me trying to do it, like trying to do the right thing. God had made changes in my heart that I actually was okay with. It's okay if I don't have to do it. Hey, how about you why don't you do it? Why don't you be the quarterback this time? And it sounds so silly because we're out in the park near Judy's house. So it's not like the world is going to know that I did or didn't do this. But in my life, it was such a blessing to me to realize, Lord, you did a miracle in me. You changed what was really something that really mattered in my heart, and you took it and you emptied it, you broke it, and you made it what it's supposed to be. And I give you praise for that. It's the little things like that make all the world of difference. Because how in the world are you going to be able to do the right thing in the bigger scheme of things if on those kind of unknown levels of not being out really for anybody else to even realize it, but and you realize what's going on between you and God. So I give praise to God for that it was noticeable to me, because all my life, that's something that I know was always a struggle, and God turned it. Lastly, verse 11. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. The thing that really takes me back about that is that he says everyone. And the way I realize what I realize about it is that this is a kind of across all spectrums. God is in control. And you don't get away with anything. God is not mocked. If you sow to the flesh, you're going to reap from the flesh. If you sow to the Spirit, you'll reap from the Spirit. God is in control. And listen, I guess, coming out of these elections, the whole exaltation process is in the hand of God. Right? The whole exaltation process is in the hand of God. God lifts up one and puts down another. And the confidence is that God is the sovereign Lord of the universe, and He will decide what He will decide, and He knows every single person's heart. Which is an encouraging thing to realize, that we don't need to fear that somehow something crazy happened, that God was off the scene and it went the wrong direction. God will have His way. Now that doesn't mean, listen, I want to be clear here. That doesn't mean that there's not evil in the world, and that doesn't mean that there are not evil intents to the authority that someone would have. But ultimately, the point is this: God is sovereignly in control of all things, and He is working things together for His purposes to bring about what His will is. He's establishing a kingdom, and that kingdom is going to be a kingdom that transcends this world and every nation in it. And He is going to be the ultimate authority. And so the struggles, the battles that take place, you know what? He does not drop the ball for a moment. I would say, though, we need to realize that since He exalts one and He humbles another, that would be a good thing to be praying about, both in terms of our leadership, but also in terms of our nation. You know what? Is it true that if the United States of America was humbled, if we took the last place, that maybe we would see the grace of God in new ways? And to plead with God for our country, that those who are proud, that He would humble them so that we could begin to change course and be the way that He's called us to be as a nation in this time, that would be an appropriate thing to pray. And in relation to whoever it is, Trump or Biden or whoever, listen, those men are men. And you know what? God knows their hearts. God knows every heart of every senator, every congressperson. He knows their hearts, and God can intercede personally with them to humble one or to exalt another according to what His will is and His plan and His purpose to establish His kingdom. The point is this: the principle is across all mankind. And you know what? You will never steal the glory of the Lord away from Him. You will never do it. You will actually find that because God is not mocked, what you wanted to do or what you thought would happen will not happen. It will come right back on you, and you will realize that there will never be an advantage taken in relation to ultimately the Lord and His purpose and His plan and what He is adorned to be. And He is a master of turning the tables. It looks this way, and all of a sudden it's turned. And you realize, you know what? Glory be to God Almighty, because He is sovereign, He is King, and our lives belong to Him.